Good day, everyone. A warm welcome to this first event of the British-Kazakh Society Education Group. It's my pleasure and privilege to be chairman of the group, and I'm delighted to welcome fellow British-Kazakh Society members of the Cambridge Central Asia Forum, the Global Challenges Research Fund Compass Project, the Kazakhstan PhD Association in the UK, and in fact, a warm welcome to you all wherever you are. The British-Kazakh Society is a friendship society. It's about developing bilateral relationships between the United Kingdom and Kazakhstan. It's about promoting cooperation and understanding between government, business, and education at all levels. The Education Group is new. Its objective is to facilitate communication and networking in post-secondary school education systems between the United Kingdom and Kazakhstan. And this first event will explore the examples of good practice that our Education Group Committee have been involved in, linking education, business, and government, the triple helix. After the presentations, please don't just ask questions, but also make suggestions for future events. Write to us, call us. This is all about the topics that British-Kazakh members and colleagues wish to debate. What will be useful? What complements work going on elsewhere? But before we move on to those presentations, it's my great honor to welcome colleagues and friends joining us from Kazakhstan. Dr. Chokhan Laumulin, Associate Professor at Satbayev University in Almaty in Kazakhstan, and Research Affiliate at Cambridge Central Asia Forum, who I've known for a number of years, will introduce our esteemed colleagues. Chokhan.
Good morning or good afternoon here in Kazakhstan. Thank you very much, David. It's my great pleasure to introduce two instead of three colleagues from Kazakhstan. And the first is the Deputy of President of National Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Kazakhstan. It's Dr. Arlan Abilmagjanov. And he will say first on behalf of the President of the Academy. And then I'll introduce Professor Alexei Sekhovoy, who is the head of International Informatization Academy here, and is acting perfectly in the sphere of triple helix innovation model, trying to prepare innovators and governors, managers, or even bureaucrats for science and for applying scientific methods in running this triple helix sphere, which is believed so important for any development. And Kazakhstan, of course, is not exception from this point of view, because this is one of the most essential issues our country has been facing during the last decade after the collapse of the Soviet Union and facing the collapse unfortunately, of academia. However, in the recent times, the new president of Kazakhstan pledged to increase 10 times the GDP expenditures on R&Ds, and from around 1% to, or from 0.1% to 1% annually, which would mean the revival of scientific infrastructure, educational facilities, and everything. And we can sense it commencing in Kazakhstan already. And one of these issues is the project we are trying to develop in the cooperation with the University of Cambridge, in particular with the Cambridge Central Asia Forum. And it's about launching an Almaty Center of Advanced Science and Technology, i.e. ACAST, in Almaty, which would include the participation and active involvement of 5 departments of Cambridge, including the most important one in the natural sciences, which is the Cavendish Lab Department of Physics, where Professor Dr. Saxena belongs to. And it's my great pleasure to introduce first Professor Tsakhovoy, who would say a few words about his activity in creating this triple helix educational framework, creating tools actually for educating representatives of three sectors: academia, industry, and government, to create this rotational cooperation within the centers of this helix in order to create this rotational movement for the overall development of the whole system. Алексей Филиппович, начинайте, пожалуйста.
Добрый день, уважаемые дамы и господа.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Огромное спасибо за высокую честь и возможность присутствовать на этом высоком мероприятии.
Let me thank you for this opportunity to be present and take part in this event,
которая свидетельствует о искренней заинтересованности в развитии казахстанско-британских отношений, которые сегодня нам очень нужны.
which is evidently proves the good relationship in cooperation between Great Britain and Kazakhstan, which our country really needs.
Мы глубоко разделяем парадигму тройной спирали,
We deeply share the paradigm of the triple helix,
который является сегодня инструментом и философским пониманием, которому нет альтернативы.
which is a philosophical and management instrument which had nowadays no alternative.
И сегодня реальным проводником и интегратором этих коммуникаций по проведению положительного влияния этой спирали на науку Казахстана выполняет наш коллега Чакан Лаумулин.
And our colleague Chakhan Lomulin is representing an organizer and a facilitator of this communication in the management of triple helix for Kazakhstan, creating the bridge between Great Britain, academia, and Great Britain and Kazakhstan.
В этом году мы почувствовали интерес со стороны нашего государства, увеличено финансирование научных программ.
This year we have sensed a rapidly growing interest from the government towards the increasing of the allocation for research and development.
Через нашу Академию информатизации вместе с профессором Лаумулиным мы представили несколько заявок на грантовое финансирование, связанные с модернизацией системы отбора работ и выбора значимых направлений деятельности.
In our Academy of Informatization, all together with Professor Laumulin, we are going to take part in a few grants dedicated to new organization and methodology of scientific work and the scheme of implementation of this work in the future.
И есть хорошая новость заключается в том, что Казахстан на постсоветском пространстве одним из первых начинает институализацию инструмента проектного управления при выполнении научных исследований.
And another good news is Kazakhstan, one of the first countries in the CIA space, former Soviet space, which has been implementing this scheme of organization of scientific method and methodology in practice.
10 дней назад Нижняя палата парламента приняла к рассмотрению законопроект.
10 days ago, the lower chamber of our parliament accepted a law
о восстановлении экономического роста Казахстана.
About retaliation, about emphasizing of economic growth in Kazakhstan.
И в рамках этого законопроекта приняты поправки, инициированные гражданским обществом.
And some amendments are accepted, which were initiated by the civil society in Kazakhstan.
о внедрении проектного управления в систему государственного планирования Республики.
Application of project management of the project management principles into the state governments.
Мы считаем, что сегодня обстоятельства, факторы среды и активы процесса организации,
Sorry?
факторы среды и наши возможности.
Yeah, considering the factors of creating such an ecosystem and our possibilities,
благоприятны для того, чтобы придать импульс нашим отношениям.
yeah, they are extremely favorable for implementing this kind of work.
И мы будем признательны, если, значит, вот наше сотрудничество продолжится, и наш коллега будет, Чакан Лаумулин будет на связи с нами.
We would really appreciate and really thankful if we can continue this kind of cooperation between the two academies of two countries, and our colleague Chakhan Laumulin could continue being moderator, negotiator, and organizer of this process. Thank you.
Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker to greet our panel is Dr. Alana Bilmajanov, who is the deputy head of Institute of Catalyst in Kazakhstan and deputy of academician Zhurinov in the National Academy of Sciences. Dr. Bilmajanov, the floor is yours, please.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues.
Во-первых, хочу принести извинения от имени и лица президента Академии наук господина Журинова.
First of all, I would like to bring apology on behalf of academician Zhurinov for not being here today with us.
В последний момент его привлекли к междуправительственному совещанию между Казахстаном и Китаем.
At the very last moment, he was called to an intergovernmental meeting regarding the Chinese-Sino-Kazakh-Sino relationship.
Он передает свои извинения и надеется, что в дальнейшем он примет участие.
He is sending his best regards and wishing all the best in our panel and expressing the hope that he could join other events.
Переходя непосредственно к тематике нашего совещания, хочу отметить, что в настоящее время Академия наук активно поддерживает модель тройной спирали.
Talking about today's agenda, I would like to emphasize that our academy is greatly involved and support the concept and its implementation of the triple helix interaction of the academia, government and business in Kazakhstan.
Как отметил прошлый спикер, на данный момент идет поэтапное инновационное развитие данной модели в Казахстане.
It was emphasized by the previous speaker. It's the implementation of the gradual implementation of the model has been happening at the moment here.
Как результат, наука и образование приходят к тому, что кроме основных двух миссий образования и исследования последние десятилетия мы переходим к третьей миссии и становимся активными участниками процессов экономического и культурного развития.
As a result, today the Academy of Sciences is getting more involved in not only in organizing the processes of science and education, but also involving into the practical aspect of innovation as well as participation in the economic processes and inspiring culture.
В связи с этим происходит усиление роли университетов во взаимодействии с промышленностью и правительством.
In accordance with it, the role of the universities in Kazakhstan have been growing.
Инновационная составляющая генерируется из данного взаимодействия, и в дополнение к традиционным функциям каждый из партнеров в этом спирали частично берет на себя функции других сфер.
Yeah, and according to the triple helix model, this interaction enriches the connection between the three pillars, the three helices of the system.
Как вы знаете, в Казахстане принят закон о коммерциализации, который способствует внедрению и коммерциализации научных и исследовательских инноваций в промышленности.
As you know, there is a commercialization law in Kazakhstan accepted, which encourages and creates incentives for the mining companies and other international and domestic companies for investing into R&D.
В рамках реализации данного закона образован институт, фонд науки, который распределяет именно бюджетные средства на инновационные исследования.
And a few entities have been created, i.e. The Science Fund and the Institute of Policy, which are trying to implement all this approach in the reality.
Данная инициатива позволяет внедрить уже более 10 новых производств в Казахстане.
The given initiative already allows to implement a dozen of industrial projects.
В том числе, как вот опять же хочу повториться, по поводу образования кластерных фондов, которые аккумулируют у себя
including the cluster funds which accumulate
ресурсы, выделяемые недропользователями.
Resources coming from the mining sector.
В данной связи на площадках Алматинского кластерного фонда и Назарбаев университет созданы определенные комиссии, которые помогают взаимодействовать субъектам предпринимательства и научно-исследовательским.
And two committees in the Almaty Cluster Fund and Nazarbayev University, respectively, are created to facilitate this process and to supervise it.
В последние десятилетия стало очевидно, что активное взаимодействие между всеми участниками данного процесса приводит к преобразованию в организациях и сотрудничеству тесному с промышленностью и обществом в целом.
It had become quite evident during the last decade in Kazakhstan that the very interaction between the players and the actors of the triple helix lead to the revival of the economy and is an important element.
Каждый из участников данного комплекса вносит значимый вклад в реализацию инновационных проектов, в общее развитие.
And each participant contributes to the facilitating process and achieving results.
Паритетный вклад, скажем, правительства заключается в первую очередь в предоставлении материальных и финансовых ресурсов.
A parity contribution from the government is proposing the resources required, material and financial, for this process.
Научно-образовательная часть заключается в подготовке кадров, стажировке и привлечении инноваций.
And scientific educational contribution is in the preparation of qualified cadres and personnel for implementing this model.
И эти три ключевых элемента в нашем пространстве имеют особое значение и органично дополняют друг друга.
And these three elements are the key ones, and then they organically complement each other.
Коллеги, спасибо за внимание. Я надеюсь на дальнейшее взаимодействие наших структур и что это приведет к более плодотворным результатам.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that this seminar, this panel, will contribute to the overall process. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to our Kazakh colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Abelmagzanov. Thank you, Professor Chekovoy, and thank you, Chokan, for interpreting. I think those contributions were so important, emphasizing the pragmatic approach that's being adopted, this triple helix, to hear about how the Academy of Sciences and other organizations are seeking practical solutions, the growing role of universities, and certainly from my own perspective, because I've spent most of my career, I think, involved in this triple helix area, although we didn't call it that a number of years ago. but leading to economic revival and projects that involve the universities and industry. And I can see my colleague Miliana nodding sagely at that, and we will be hearing from Miliana shortly. So thank you very much indeed, colleagues, and thank you for joining us from Kazakhstan, and hope you'll enjoy the rest of today's event. I'd like to move on now and introduce our next speaker, Fergus Robertson. Fergus was a founding director of the British-Kazakh Society and has had over 35 years in the oil and gas industry. He was the first honorary consul for the Republic of Kazakhstan in Scotland. Fergus.
Fergus, you are muted.
I was just trying to unmute. Have you got me now? Thank you about that. My apologies. Typical of life, technical things, having sorted out everything in our mind, we get a technical one with myself. Right. I've been delighted to be so involved in Kazakhstan for, well, my early visits of 1994, 95, and to watch how many things have developed so well and streaking ahead at times. Anyway, back to Kazakhstan and the Kazakh British Technical University, KBTU. I was involved from, I kind of say, before day one. And let me start off by saying we're looking at the 1990s, the history of things that went on there, and the international oil companies taking a great interest, and the development of Kashagan starting. It was Shell-led. Archaeology was developed, the international companies, and Kashagan was taking Kazakhstan into the offshore industry for the first time. So a lot of technology was going to be needed. Not to talk too much about the technical aspects, but it was shallow water, it froze in the winter. The wells were, by world standard, very deep. The high pressure was the highest in the world, and it was a very complex reservoir. I was delighted to be involved in President Nazarbayev's visit in the year 2000, when he signed the first MOU with the British government for the development of education, science, and technology. The next thing that happened was Dinara, the president's second daughter, arrived to check up or get in contact with a number of universities. And that, to make it short, led to her visit to Aberdeen, my home, and discussions started with Aberdeen University. I then had the enjoyment as the honorary consul to work with Dr. Adil Akhmetov, who was at that time the ambassador, Kazakh ambassador in London. And we worked together on the development of what became KBTU. The involvement of my old university was a personal delight from me, Robert Gordon. And it was a young and pushy organization which spent a lot of its time overseas. Aberdeen University actually said, let's leave it to Robert Gordon. So it would take us 5 years to go through all the committees. I'm sure this is something academia is used to. It would have to go through about 5 or 6 committees, and it would take about up to 5 years to come to a decision. Robert Gordon's decided the day we visited, yes, we want to do this. We want to enter Kazakhstan. So that was great. And after that, it got set up in 2001. And it was an excellent start. We also had Heriot Watt interested, and we had later the Imperial College in London. And the big thing that helped us was financial support from Shell and British Gas. Those days, there wasn't much money about, and that was a great help to get it started. Dinara became the first governor, chairman of the governor's board, and Adil Akhmetov, Dr. Adil Akhmetov, became the first rector. And we got started with undergraduate programs in 2002. And this led on to further developments and other universities coming in. The British Council, British Embassy, of course, the Kazakh government, were very keen and supported the project, and a series of meetings were held in 2002. That was between KBTU, the British Council, and the UK universities representative. KBTU decided first to offer undergraduate programs from the 2002-2003 academic year. The UK universities agreed to focus on a selection of postgraduate programs, and with sponsorship from Shell and BG, RGU and Heriot Watt started some programs in 2004, and the very first graduations 2005. So I'm talking history. We've moved a long way from there, but you know, in my experience, history is a great director to the future. And building a good foundation is also, I think, essential to good development of projects, and graduates and graduation and university is project after project after project. So it's good to be well managed. Since 2003, Kazakhstan JSC has been the sole shareholder of KBTU JSC. However, in 2018, a public foundation, education fund, and Nursultan Nazarbayev purchased the shares of the Kazakh British Technical University, and the privatization took place following the government of Kazakhstan's privatization program that was approved by the government order number 1141 on December the 30th, 2015. My last comments are really to say that KBTU has continued to grow and develop. It's a good organization. We had many problems in the early days, but they were all dealt with successfully by the enthusiasm of the supporters of the university. We created an advisory council with both Kazakhs, fortunately, and Brits and others. We had a few Italians, a few French, and generally everything worked rather well. And that's really what it's all about, was establishing the first, what I would call, successful partnership in academia. And it continues to be a good partnership. That's, thank you for the opportunity to talk about the old days, the early days, before we got into the magnificent work that is now being done by so many of you who are with us today. So thank you very much. Bye.
Fergus, thank you very much indeed for that presentation. And what a fantastic example, a successful example of international cooperation, of links with the oil and gas industry, and really a practical, pragmatic development of the type that our Kazakh colleagues were talking about just a moment ago. Exciting stuff, and that it continues to grow is fantastic. And I'd now like to pass to Dr. Miljana Radivojevic, who is a lecturer in archaeomaterials at University College London and a trustee of the Institute of Archaeometallurgical Studies. Miljana.
Hello, good morning still, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join you here. And I was delighted to hear Fergus talking about the importance of history taking us forward, I guess my perspective will be to go deeper in time. So as an archaeologist, I would like to take us 5,000 years ago, where I could see easily how this triple helix was still existing, and maybe the roots of the triple helix, if you like, basically where the steppe societies, which I'm studying in my research, have been the major connector between the East and West, and more so providing technological knowledge, especially when it comes to metallurgy and mining, to the emerging political leadership, say in outer Eurasia, in the states, earlier states that we know, such as the Shang dynasty, or Indus civilization, or Persian civilization, or Mediterranean, and so on. So taking us deep into Europe. So you would imagine that I come from a perspective of a field archaeologist, but also archaeometallurgist. So I'm urging research on the pastoralist societies that lived 5,000 years ago in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, across Russia as well. And I'm trying to see and address the issue of technological knowledge and the knowledge exchange and the knowledge economy when it comes to metal production. Metal production was very important because we're talking about the Bronze Age. We're talking about the times when the societies were growing stronger, growing more complex, and needed more tools to conquer territories. And while we learn in history that many of these conquerors actually lived around like Southwest Asia or China or Europe, we actually learn very little about the providers of those tools, providers of the knowledge, and the providers of technology, which were the steppe societies. So that is a civilization on its own that has been very often overlooked in historical narratives. We don't talk about the societies in the steppes that follow these usual route of social complexity development, from tribes to chiefdoms to states, empires, and so on. We are talking about societies that are horizontally connected, that have this non-uniform complexity, that have different institutions of beliefs, of economical activities that are shared amongst them, and they work in a completely different way. But that does not make them less of a civilization. So going back to like, why does it matter and how does it matter in history and archaeology? Well, these societies were the co-creators of the knowledge on which the tenets of the modern society exist. These societies were participating very actively in the crucible of the making of Eurasian population. Not only that we know about the movements of steppe societies deep in Europe, and all of us have a steppe gene in ourselves. Looking at the Asian DNA analysis right now, we do have a little bit of that, just because, and thanks to their mobility and thanks to their I would say like technological prowess at the time. So that is often very much forgotten when we come to talk today about where is Central Asia now and where is Kazakhstan now. Because there's a long, thousands of years longer history where the Central Asian populations were the major co-creators of the knowledge that I can speak of from my own perspective on metallurgy and mining and provision of knowledge like across Eurasia. But we see a certain period of time, like the Soviet Union and the fall of the Soviet Union, after which things got harder. But that's just a blip in history. If I look at the 5,000 years long duration perspective, it's something that didn't last long. It lasts long for our lifetimes, but when you look at the bigger picture, it actually didn't. So if we go back to acknowledge and respect the ways in which societies in Central Asia were connecting and were co-creating the knowledge that was widely shared, I think that is the pathway where archaeology of this region can take us into the future and give us more of an insight of how and why and where we can do better, both from this end of the Eurasian continent and the one that is currently in Kazakhstan. So that is my brief portfolio, if you like, of the research and where is my research leading me.
Miliana, thank you very much indeed for that, and fascinating that archaeology provides a window onto the future. And I think in so much of this area of the triple helix, The links between government, universities and industry go back many, many years. And we can learn so much from things that have happened in the past, because one of the things I've found over the years is that whilst science and technology move on, the way we organize our governments and society doesn't always move on as fast. So we can learn a lot from the past. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Maya Chankseliani. Maya is Associate Professor of Comparative and International Education at the University of Oxford. Maya.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. Higher education and science in Central Asia and more broadly in former Soviet countries is at the center of my academic interests. I have done quite a bit of work on teaching and research at Kazakhstani universities as such. And I have observed that in the last decade or so, Kazakhstan has made remarkable progress in developing the higher education sector. On the one hand, you see the diversification of the higher education landscape. We see very different types of universities emerging, universities developing, large private sector is there in higher education. Also, we see a very high level of the internationalization of higher education sector. We see examples of model transfers of higher learning from a foreign country. We see examples of foreign accreditations, such as the British-Kazakh Technical University, KIMEP University, etc. We have branch campuses in Kazakhstan and a lot of mobility of student and staff. This is really remarkable what has been achieved, especially in the last decade or so. And one indicator of all those achievements is that today we have 3 Kazakhstani universities in global university rankings. Al-Farabi Kazakh National University, Gumilyov Eurasian National University, and Karaganda State University are visible globally as indicated by global rankings, whatever criticisms we may have about global rankings in general. Now, to give you a little bit of a flavor of my work, what I have done in Kazakhstan, I will of course not speak about everything. I have done quite a bit of work on the access of rural graduates of rural schools to universities. I have done a little bit of work, again in Kazakhstan of course, about internationalization and student mobility. Today I wanted to give you a flavor about two big projects that I have been undertaking in the last year or two or so. One of them focusing on the creation of high quality teaching and learning ecosystems within Kazakhstani universities, and another focusing on the development of science, development of research in Kazakhstan and in other former Soviet countries. So to start with the first one, creation of high quality teaching and learning ecosystems. I have created this concept of approaching high quality of teaching and learning as an ecosystem as I started working on a British Council funded project a year ago, probably now, quite a few months ago. We lost the count of time lately. That was actually developed, this kind of training program, as a workshop and delivered to 25 leaders of higher education in Kazakhstan in early March, just before we went out into lockdown. So it was lovely to have Kazakhstan as the last country where I traveled actually before the lockdown. So what is the idea behind this ecosystem? So I closely connect this idea with the purposes of higher education broadly. As I do research in Kazakhstan and other former Soviet countries, I realize that purposes of higher education are largely conceptualized within the framework of human capital, knowledge economy, modernization of societies. Higher education is generally in our region considered to be valuable insofar as it improves individual incomes and contributes to country's economic development. And quality assurance systems within higher education are very closely aligned with this view. Yet, higher education is much more than a tool to acquire skills and knowledge that you can sell at the marketplace. It's about a holistic development of responsible, I would say, socially and environmentally conscious citizens who are well prepared to pursue the freedoms that they value. In order to achieve these two purposes, to support individuals' solid professional development and at the same time their civic and social self-formation, I propose that we need to think about the quality in higher education in very innovative ways. And the program that I have designed and delivered in Kazakhstan exactly follows this innovative approach of thinking about quality holistically, including thinking about curriculum, extracurricular activities, pedagogical culture, assessment, institutional autonomy and governance, all together, taken together, directed at learners and the opportunities that learners will have after graduating from universities. Now, the workshop participants, I remember, as well as participants of another study actually that I conducted last year in Kazakhstan and in Georgia, raised issues related to university governance and more specifically to academic freedom, integrity, institutional autonomy. It appears that these are, there is a demand for a new model of governance, which would be relatively free from extensive regulatory burden and external interference. And there is a need for the democratization of governance structures at universities, where academics and students are able to participate actively in developing university strategies to serve this bigger idea of creating high quality teaching and learning ecosystems. And also to create systems where young academics are fully supported to contribute to the development of Kazakhstan. So this is to give you a flavor about high quality teaching and learning ecosystems creation in my work. And another area, I'll take much less time to describe this, I know we do not have much time, is the development of research capacity at universities. Now, this is a really large project that I undertake together with colleagues, I lead together with colleagues at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Now, this project involves, includes all countries across the former Soviet Union, including Kazakhstan, and will look at the development of research capacity at universities following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. We'll all know that universities did not have a research mission within the Soviet Union, and to see how universities develop this mission is quite fascinating. I cannot really report all the results at the moment, but I can give you a flavor by giving you some numbers that were generated as a result of a systematic, thorough analysis of the entire research output from all former Soviet countries, including Kazakhstan. I'm talking about the global research output included in the Web of Science database, for example. And we also analyzed a number of other statistical indicators. One thing that emerges is that Kazakhstan generally has one of the lowest expenditures on research and development as a proportion of GDP. Choka noted at the start that the Kazakhstani government is intending to increase this proportion of expenditure on research and development, and I would say that this is absolutely crucial, because at the moment Kazakhstan spends around 0.1% of GDP, which is 1/10 of 1% of GDP on R&D. Compare this with Belarus, 0.6%, Russia almost 1%, or Estonia 1.4%. Now, funding is a big issue. Another kind of interesting indicator is that every 100 research and development personnel in Kazakhstan produce 7 international publications per year. 100 research and development personnel produce 7 publications, including in the Web of Science. This is much better indicator than other Central Asian countries. It's even better than Russia or Ukraine, but significantly worse than, for example, Estonia or Armenia. Okay, so just to give you where Kazakhstan stands in relation to other countries. Now, very interesting, fascinating, and hugely positive thing is that Kazakhstani academics seem to tap into international networks very actively. 75% of all publications from Kazakhstan are co-authored with international collaborators. So it seems that Kazakhstani authors are very attractive for international partners to work with, and at the same time Kazakhstani academics may be inclined to seek those partnerships because of the scarcity of various types of resources within the country. Overall, of course, it's wonderful that there are so many partnerships across the board. Now, despite the partnerships, still, when we look at the quality and the impact of publications emerging from Kazakhstan, it's visible that there is a lot of space for the development in this area, for improving research capacity of academics. I will be presenting all of these results in great detail on the 29th of October. I can even share a link for that free talk. You can register and we can have further discussions regarding the research capacity development. For now, I will stop here and allow other participants to introduce themselves. Thank you very much.
Maya, thank you very much indeed for that detailed presentation. I expected you to talk about what is effectively the idea of a university, what is a university education for, and I think that is something that our colleagues in Kazakhstan, as well as colleagues in other countries, would welcome as a separate event in itself, I'm sure. I'm certainly taken, as you say, by the diversity of higher education in Kazakhstan, the large private sector, the continuing links overseas, and the fact that great progress is being made. I think what I have found in Kazakhstan is there are great stories, and it's a proud academic community, and it's just a delight to see what progress is being made and rising up the world rankings, and rightly so. I'd now like to pass on to Dr. Montu Saxena, Director of the Cambridge Central Asia Forum, Principal Research Associate at the Cavendish Laboratory. And Montu has been awarded the Presidential Medal for Services to Education in Kazakhstan, a long-standing friend from the first days we met in work on Central Asia. So Montu, over to you.
Thank you, David. It's a great pleasure to be here at this launch event, and equally a great pleasure to kind of help build the society education arm, something we all have been working for a long time. But in the way of introduction, firstly, I'd like to say a couple of words about the so-called Cambridge Central Asia Forum, which has been mentioned a number of times already since the morning. Not to leave the idea that it's some kind of a conference or a forum. It's actually a research center, a research initiative since literally the late 90s, which evolved from the interest of students. When we were students who were interested in Central Asia, then we became researchers on Central Asia. Now we are academics on Central Asia. So it has grown with that. And since we're talking about history and legacy, I always like to share the anecdote that how I first arrived in Kazakhstan, and way back in 1991, during still the last days of Soviet Union, being stuck for 3 days because of lack of electricity in the train power lines. And that is now the fabulous city of Nur Sultan. Back then, it was a train station with a small settlement around it. So having seen from that what has grown has always been an amazing thing, and having been part of that story as an observer, as a participant, as a partner, and bringing the interest of best minds to focus towards what's happening in Central Asia is the main purpose of Central Asia Forum. We like, and many of the speakers you have heard today have been part of this endeavor, and they have made it into something. So, and that's what, looking forward in the society, that's, we wanted to give you a flavor of the kind of expertise, kind of interest, very diverse, from history and archaeology, which can be leveraged today, to industry, to specifically looking at educational institutions. Is extremely important that we keep the cross section and we hear each other. So we enrich what we do. Often these debates about a business or not business, education being business or education creating the opportunity for business, we get stuck just within these debates. But when we look at what is needed as academics, we look at long-term things. We look at how We look at what has happened in the past, what could help to build the future. And here in Cambridge, we run perhaps maybe a unique course within Center of Development Studies, where we teach master's students a module on Central Asia, bringing to them both history and the modern issues. We have a vibrant PhD program, and Dr. Laumelin is a product of that. So there are a number of different things, different streams, which connect our endeavors in the Central Asian space, in Kazakhstan space in particular. What we specifically like to talk about here, and not so much about what my own research is, which spans in the area of physics of quantum materials, which of course I think are a very important element of Kazakhstan's future. And I say it incorrectly. I think it's globe's future, in which Kazakhstan and Central Asia will be an important player. I think Dr. Laumelin will say something about it afterwards, or I will elaborate if necessary. What we would like, we hope, in building this society, this education arm of the society, we look at the notion of education broadly. It's all about how we leverage research findings, research endeavors, research cultures to policy, to growth, to industry, but to educational institutions themselves, as well as Maya emphasized. That's a very important part of how we think. One of the challenges in front of us is the legacy of dividing research and education in separate boxes. And research capacity, as Maya said, needs to be built. And what is very, very important is that when universities or institutions, new or old, in this space, in Central Asian space, in Kazakhstan space, develop, they need to ensure that you can't just ask your academics to publish papers, or you can't just ask them to write books. You can't just ask them to have projects which are international. You need to create both a value system within the university. It's not based on metrics. It's not about how high up a metric of a ranking of universities you go up. That has become an obsession. It's about the quality itself. We need to think through these things, and we hope that together with our colleagues, students, different generations, both across Britain, Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Europe, it doesn't matter, it's limitless, to build the notion of quality, which was been highlighted already, and specifically in the area of science and technology, which is one of very contradictory, how to say, regime. We have had an interesting, very particular notion of development within the region, which is that when external partners arrive to work with this region, the region which had seen perhaps one of the highest level of educational and scientific development during the Soviet era, of course, going further past, as Miliana pointed out. However, all of these things started to go in a free fall in one way. But when development partnerships, when educational partnerships, they interact with the region, they tend to focus on building things from the ground, as if they're missing. Here, we have a slightly different challenge in front of us. It's about consolidating what exists and working to connect it both internally in the country, regionally, in Central Asia and Eurasia, and also globally. And so it's about arresting a fall and building something from that rather than growing necessarily things from the ground. We're not looking at institutions which are completely, empty. So we really need to focus on that. That's why we have a great team here. This team is only, how to say, a footprint in a sense. And we want to make them into a bigger network. We'll find different ways of connecting with you. That I think David will perhaps talk a little bit about towards the end. But my job here is to ensure that it's inclusive, it is dynamic, and it takes into account what the people in Central Asia would like to see and do, but also what we can share from here in Britain. So thank you for that.
Montu, thank you very much indeed for that presentation. I so totally agree with you in terms of consolidating on what exists, building on existing. I think when I first went to Kazakhstan, I found that in Europe and in the UK, there were lots of misunderstandings. There are lots of great things going on which can be developed and grown. And again, you brought up the point that Maya was about effectively the role of a university. And I've always felt that this is why this triple helix model is so important. You know, a government-funded institution tends to respond to government edicts, but we often find research and the education side almost separated, and yet we have very often in the UK recently tried to look at the idea of not just undergraduate and postgraduate teaching and links with research, but also continuing professional development and the exploitation of some of that research, hence the closer links with industry and a little bit more resilience and thoughtfulness in dealings with government, and not simply doing what government thinks universities should do, which changes as quickly in the UK as ministers change, which is always a little bit of a worry. Finally, I'd like to go back to Dr. Chokhan Lamalin and hear from you, Chokhan, in Kazakhstan about and I know you've been doing a lot of work on the triple helix and so on, especially in your time here at Cambridge. So over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, David. What I would like to emphasize in once we're talking about the triple helix model, it's in my view, I consider academia or university as one of these helices as the most important element. Because, as you mentioned, in some countries, they sometimes are trying to substitute a real sustainable development with different kind of political or legal reforms. From my opinion, none of which reform would be useful or working if it's not filled up with the competence and expertise. Without it, it's simply impossible to implement any good deed. And from this point of view, I consider that academia or university as one of the helices in the triple helix model is the very important source of producing this expertise and producing actually people, human capital, for filling up all three spheres of academia, of industry, and of course of government or state. And in this sense, and it's impossible without science, in my view, it's what we have achieved as a civilization within all this millennia. It's rapidly increased within the last 2 centuries during the Industrial Revolution, which derived from scientific development. And I think that we are experiencing as a mankind, humankind, we're experiencing a new stage or new industrial revolution, which will change our ecosystem, we will change our habitats. They're already changing. Our social model is very different from that of 10 or 25 years ago in many ways. And I believe, and it's only beginning, because all this, despite all the difficulties even the UK scientific sector had been facing during the last years or decades, anyway, witnessing everything in, for instance, the University of Cambridge, one can imagine, looking at this level of research, one can imagine that how this already, many of which already happened, discoveries, will change our inhabitat, if I may use this word. And for instance, Dr. Saxena can tell a lot. And I think the most important thing is that for any society, and especially, of course, for Kazakhstan, it's to match this development, the sustainable development that's defined by UN goals by 2030, with research and education. As Dr. Saxena rightly mentioned, it's not only the practical side of it, of these discoveries or application of technologies or innovation. It's also research culture. And it's very very important element of the existing ecosystem, of the environment, of social environment, and it's actually which provides economic progress and development, not vice versa. So this approach we can often face in developing countries when they think that we will develop economy and will achieve something they know, and after that they will deal with culture and science. I think it's a failing approach, and culture and science and research culture in particular is a constituent, and it's a driving vehicle of economic development from which we receive but not only fundamental science and culture, but also engineering, technology, innovation, and build on it our economy and finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for Charkan for that contribution. So important and important to get your perspective on what is going on. Now we've got about 30 minutes for questions. We've had a number coming in, and I will trigger this off. The first one, and I think perhaps Maya might be interested in responding to this. It's from a Cambridge, a gentleman called Serik Onalbaili at Cambridge, who's president of the Sirdarya University in Kazakhstan. And he asks about plans for our engagement with private and regional universities. And I think given the diversity of universities in Kazakhstan, Maya, maybe you'd be interested in thinking a little bit about what plans we might have in future, blue sky thinking, for engagement with private and regional universities. Thanks.
David, can I be rude to Serik is a former Cambridge graduate and now a president of a university in Kazakhstan. So he's participating from that side, not from this side. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Montu.
Thank you, Montu. I might have met him as well. It would be nice to have faces also, but that's okay. Thank you very much for the question. Our engagement opportunities and what we will be doing, this is a launch event, entirely depends on the partners' needs and their kind of support they may be seeking from us, and the learning opportunities that both sides will see within different institutions. So as I mentioned, the diversity of the landscape of universities in Kazakhstan is an enormous achievement. It's great to have different types of universities. It's great to have a large and growing, very diverse private sector, to have regional universities, some of which are really flourishing and meeting the needs of their communities in an excellent way. So there is I have not thought that we need to approach necessarily different kinds of universities in a different way. Of course, it will be entirely tailored, any collaboration, on the needs of a university, irrespective of whether they are public or private or regional or national flagship or international. And I personally am open to all types of collaboration opportunities. As I mentioned, those two examples that I have given related to creating high quality teaching and learning ecosystems or supporting universities to develop their research capacity could be, for example, two areas that I would be interested to work on in the future. Again, as Montu mentioned, explained very clearly, of course, Montu and myself, we're academics, and our main interest always is the academic side of things. And of course, we connect it with practical needs, but we need to also be interested somehow academically in all types of collaborations that we will undertake. Thank you. I hope that answers the question. And I am, of course, open to speak further. You can contact me via email, contact our chair, and we can continue speaking about these opportunities.
Thank you very much indeed, Maya. I'll move on to the next questions. There are two from Carlo Gambara, who is also a student in development studies at the University of Cambridge. His first question is about the change to the Latin alphabet in Kazakhstan and what impact that might have on education and society in general. I wonder, Chokan, if I can ask you to, for your thoughts on that.
And I will.
Yeah. David, what is the question, please? Again.
It's about the change to the Latin alphabet as opposed to Cyrillic.
Oh, it's a very difficult question, though. Although Kazakhstan used to have the Latin alphabet after the Bolshevik Revolution, after 1917, it was introduced in early 1920s, and it existed until 1940, quite a long time, and the first generation of academic scholars, scientists, they were educated in Latin. And in Kazakhstan, it's rather very political approach. And being as researcher myself, I'm very much, I don't support the idea of politicization of academic issues. Because I can't understand the argument that Kazakhstan will become more civilized using Latin alphabet, which would mean that Japan or China or are not civilized. It's a ridiculous argument, to be honest. But on the relevant side, being a linguist in my first major, I know that another approach is that saying that Latin alphabet is closer to the pronunciation of the Kazakh language. It's from academic point of view, is ridiculous as well, because it doesn't matter what kind of science you're using to express your speech, your oral approach. Then it's so basically the most important thing that this thing happened already in Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan, and we can see some results already. It's almost 30 years in Uzbekistan since the Latin alphabet was adopted. And still, both alphabets are in use there. And you can see that even official institute, bodies, entities, you can go online, and they freely use both alphabet, which creates, I think, in my view, creates the additional, not necessary mess. And if you speak to Uzbek intellectuals, they would confirm that eventually it's been leading to a segregation, intellectual segregation in the society, for the reason which can be explained very simply. It's that in the 1950s, in the global discourse, the term Westernization was replaced with modernization, and it's mostly because of the achievement of the Soviet Central Asian republics. So our modernization was Soviet and was closely tied to using the Russian language. And the thing is not that any language is more developed. It's not true. The thing is, it's an enormous knowledge accumulated, global knowledge, not only Russian, or accumulated in that alphabet, which might be lost.
Indeed. Montu, you want to come in on this one as well, I think.
Yeah, just very briefly, just to say something more, I would say, philosophical. The Central Asia region and Eurasia region, but particularly this continuum of Central Asia, South Asia, going to Southeast Asia, is a linguistic realm which has always been multilingual. Many of the notions that we come from bigger cultures of very monolingual societies don't really apply. And this is exactly where the discussion that I had earlier in my head brought in. You have to analyze what is necessary for quality in a particular place and its legacy and its future. So making choices based on assumed idea of what is better rather than actually what is better, one has to consider. together with that, we have to take into account the ability of people. So in Jokan's particular discussion, we have already heard the ability of Central Asian populations, the ability of Kazakh people to negotiate and navigate multiple languages, multiple scripts, multiple ways of doing things is something we need to celebrate. It should not just become a zero-sum game. Bringing Latin alphabet shouldn't mean you get rid of a skill that most of the population has, whether it's Cyrillic, whether it's Arabic, whether it's whatever other thing. You know, in Britain, in schools, we try to get our kids to learn more scripts and languages. Here you have them already. So it's adding to what you have rather than deleting from what you have. And I think that's the key message I think we would like to promote.
Excellent points, gentlemen. Thank you very much for that. And the same questioner wonders about the potential impact of the Aga Khan project, whether it might bring Central Asia as a center for education and attracting students from, say, South Asia. Maya, do you have a view on that?
Absolutely. Central Asia has a potential to become a hub in the region, in the wider region outside Central Asia too. And Kazakhstan in particular within Central Asia has the largest potential, I think, to become such a hub to attract students and to increase the inbound mobility of students. And that would be fantastic because also it will be a great opportunity for people outside Central Asia to learn about Kazakhstan, to learn about Central Asia by studying within Central Asia, to learn about the culture, to learn about the habits and huge intellectual and historical achievements of these countries and their history, similar to what China is doing by attracting students from abroad. People are learning about China and becoming more interested. And, you know, all kinds of other links very often start from learning about the other, learning about the culture, right? So, yes, absolutely. I think the project has the immense capacity.
From my own experience of looking at the University of Central Asia and other initiatives, what I like about the Aga Khan approach is that they are there for the long term. They're not looking for some sort of short-term project. They look to develop over many years and are committed to those.
Absolutely. And the little thing, if I could add, is that a great thing about the project also that I really like is the location of universities that they have chosen outside the large urban centers in order to give opportunities to people who are not necessarily located in the central places where most of the universities are located in all of the countries where they have universities. That's great and very close to my heart, as I also do a bit of research on inequalities in access to universities. So I think that's really an effort that is very important.
Okay. We have
David, may I add?
Go on.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to point out again that these notions, the new ideas, new universities which are coming in, definitely I endorse that thing, but we shouldn't forget that Central Asia actually for a very long time, again, going back into history of Bukhara and Samarkand and Turkestan and Taraz and Otrar, attracted students from all over Asia and the world. Then even more recently, if you, again, we end up looking at data from the West, but if you go to the medical and engineering schools, academies in Kazakhstan and across Central Asia, you'll find there are a significant number of students from South Asia, Southeast Asia who study there currently. So that this process is there, and we need to kind of connect the dots while we're doing these things. So there's a particular impetus always to try to create new institutions and new civil society and not really being aware of what exists already. And that is a very big task, I think, as you know, to take into account as we go forward.
Okay, we have a question which Fergus may wish to consider. This is about targeting education towards what are called more marketable skills. In other words, preparing students for employment. Now, this is something that Maya keeps raising, and rightly so, but there seems to be a general feeling, and this applies in many countries, that our institutions don't provide businesses and employers with the with graduates with the knowledge and skills that are required. Do you think that's still the case, Fergus? And if so, what could or should be done about it?
Oh boy. Yes, it's always been a problem. It's been particularly a problem for the oil and gas industry, where the biggest attraction for an oil company, for somebody coming in, is that they should have the basic skills, but is enthusiasm and application for hard work. The practical application of what the industry is about and what it's trying to achieve technically. That's the only area that I have an interest in, knowledge of, is oil and gas for 40 years. And that's been a perpetual problem, and it's still a problem today. However, we maybe have an oil and gas industry that is shrinking. So therefore, there may be less of a requirement. But yes, I think the thing that attracted the operating companies when they came to Kazakhstan for the beginning was the amazement, and I use that word carefully, at the level of basic education that existed throughout the old Russian republics. I mean, it was excellent. Literary skills were significantly higher than those in the United Kingdom. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And if I can just add my view, which is partly in answer to another question which we've had about progress made in the development of the education sector from in terms of drafting policy or strategy with regard to relations between education, business and government. And I think I've said many times, when I first started dealing with this with the UK government back in the 80s, I used to talk about developments that had taken place in the UK back in the 1870s, where exactly the same problems were being addressed. Employers were concerned that the institutions weren't providing them with the sort of graduates they required, and various initiatives happened after that. And the question really comes down to how one looks at what's happened in the past. As I've said already today, certainly from my perspective, universities are about undergraduate and postgraduate education. They're about updating and continuing professional development. And there's some fantastic work that goes on there. And that means engaging with a particular business sector. It means engaging with particular individual businesses. And that research, of course, one wants curiosity and the blue skies stuff, but equally one wants to exploit developments that are taking place for the benefit of the economy, the benefit of other people. And that then feeds back into undergraduate teaching, and it feeds back into continuing professional development. So it's about keeping the whole institution up to date. And government initiatives, in my experience, aren't very good at that. They're done with the right intention, but because it's short term, it doesn't really work through. It needs to be individual institutions looking forward strategically to what their role is and who they need to link with, who are their customers, what sort of qualities, knowledge and skills are required, what sort of research should they engage in, rather than simply responding to various government or international agency initiatives. They have their place, but I think one shouldn't be driven solely by that. Maya.
A tiny thing to that. I would like to add that in order for universities to exercise their agency in forming these partnerships with businesses and to be an equal independent partner, they need to have their institutional autonomy, not only on the paper, but in reality. Without a real institutional autonomy, and Kazakhstan is making steps to giving more autonomy to state universities, but this process needs to be finalized soon so that universities, for example, financially do not should not need different approvals from the government. They should be fully autonomous, as we have universities in the UK, so that they use their agency and form their partnerships as they find fit, without any external interference in their business as such. Of course, there is proper procedures of control because universities receive public funding, but they should be fully autonomous.
I personally
Can I come back
with that, Fergus?
Yes, I would just like to go back to a practical problem that existed. When we first came into Kazakhstan, and I'm talking about KBTU, we looked at what the needs were, and the biggest needs were project management. And the biggest problem that the operating oil companies had was logistics, because if you don't get your logistics right, you're not operating, and it's a very expensive problem. So Robert Gordon's, while he came in particularly on engineering skills, and Harriet Watt with reservoir studies, etc., Robert Gordon's first courses and first graduates were in logistics, a practical application of logistics. Project management was the problem, and managing the logistics was a major problem in what was the biggest industry earning money for Kazakhstan.
That's an interesting one, and certainly what I found when I was working in Kazakhstan, it applied in other countries in Central Asia, and indeed it applies in many countries, is the ability to ensure that the staff in the institutions are right up to date, working at a practical level and not just a theoretical level.
Yes.
I think Maya's point about the autonomy of universities is very well said, but frankly, the universities in the UK are not autonomous, even if legally they are. They respond to wherever the money comes from, and that's primarily the government. And I think we need to revisit this again. The only way to, in my view, have the sort of institutions that respond to and are not just to business, but to other opportunities, is to have that greater degree of autonomy, to have an institutional strategic plan. Where are we going as an institution? What is our role? What is a graduate? What are we here for? And I don't think many institutions really think those things through. Montu?
Yes, I think just pitching into this debate, but I think it addresses a number of other questions that are coming through, is that again, creating dichotomies between practical and theoretical, which has become kind of, it's natural to do so, I understand where it comes from, but we have to go back and look at what are the success stories. So if we take the fantastic American or British or German or Japanese institutions, or even the Soviet institutions, they produce people who are able to do many things. So what do we do as academics? And somebody has written about blue skies research and so on. So it's about converting information into knowledge, and knowledge into public good or possibly commercial gain. This is a continuum that exists. And universities are best placed to equip and tool people for all of these skills and abilities. And we do have a product mentality. Our product is the student. Our product is the knowledge that we produce, which is quality assured, benchmarked above almost any other product that's out there. And its shelf life is almost the whole life itself, right? So yes, maybe something that's necessary now for 5 years or 3 years is fine. But can they retool themselves to do something else? And that's what people do, right? That's if you start in a company or a university or any kind of a job, you progress. You go through the process of upgrading yourself and getting promoted, getting better salary or better, whatever else you're seeking, power or money or whatever else. But you need to do that, and the skills come from the basic education moment you do. So if we shrink the education to what is needed now by a particular sector or particular government or particular need, then we're taking away that from the universities. Yeah. And I think that's where the education debate needs to continue to renew itself. Yeah.
There are far more questions than we can deal with today. We have about 6 minutes left, but an awful lot of them are focusing on this topic. So I'm beginning to think that our next event might go into a bit more detail on this.
Yes.
Inevitably, we've got a question about plans for post-pandemic education systems linking with the rest of the world. I mean, Chokhan, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. I personally think the pandemic is much overplayed, and you may have a different view, but I really think that we don't need to necessarily alter the way we're providing education to a group of people who are not prone to getting this particular virus and are prone to perhaps many other risks associated with the process of living. Chokhan.
Yeah, thank you, David. Recently, both Monto and I discovered and made an article dated back in 2006 in Science and Technology, journal by Royal Society. And there was it called Global Predictors. And then there was a coronavirus in 2006 depicted in the articles. And it was explained from the scientific point of view and possible inevitability of appearance of a version of coronavirus. And the only mean to deal or tackle this would be global and local lockdowns. And everything was explained in an academic language, I mean, nonchalantly as a scenario. So I think what happened was not avoidable and been happening. However, on the other hand, it's really so many questions. And the first question is education, all types of stages of education, especially for the high school or primary school. It's so difficult to provide. And I personally think that proper education is coming from an ecosystem which is created in universities. It's from interaction not only between teachers and students, but also between the students. And it's challenge we've been facing. We should find a solution. Otherwise, this idiocracy we may face. I mean, the whole mankind may face with the idiocracy of because I can hardly imagine doctors or engineers doing their job after graduating online. It's really impossible to imagine, and we would hardly be willing to visit such a doctor. And that's luckily Oxbridge is in a better position because still face-to-face education leaves some room for tackling the gathering because it's just 2 or 3 people together. However, it's still unclear what to do, and it's a really challenge whose consequences will keep affecting us for a quite long time.
Okay, thank you. Montu, final point.
Final point, really, 1 minute left. So David, whether this pandemic or any other, it's very important. The fundamental point is the pandemics, like certain other things, like earthquakes or climatic things, are inevitable. And they can never be played down at any point in history. It doesn't matter how one feels about one particular one. And ability to respond to them at all levels, at the levels of health. It's not a debate between, what kind of pandemic will affect who. It's a question of, can we deal with the pandemic? And whatever it might be. So in that sense, what Chokhan was referring to was that we continue to build knowledge and discard it because we don't have continuity of systems, as you yourself were saying. The governments do it at their meaning at what they need to do now. But building that thing within the policy, when we can respond to these things, they may be completely false, but at the same time, that is a public fear which we need to address. And it could be something as far as a smallpox, which might propagate tomorrow. Are we ready to deal with that? So we should use the opportunity to gear up and fix the system, which we are not really doing at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, well, it now falls to me to wind today's event up. Thank you very much to all our participants who've stayed with us throughout this hour and a half of, I think, very stimulating discussion. We've covered a lot of ground, and I think it has helped us in the committee to work out where we might go next in terms of events which will interest our colleagues. This comes from the many questions that are being asked that we just sadly don't have time to answer. I'd like in particular to thank our Kazakh colleagues, our esteemed colleagues in Kazakhstan, Chokan Laumalin, Dr. Alan Abil Magzanov, and Professor Tsekovoy. From our own side, I'd like to thank Fergus Robertson, Miliana Radivojevic, Maya Chanksiliani, and Montu Saxena for their not just their contributions, but their hard work to set this thing up in the first place. And finally, my thanks to the British Kazakh Society Secretariat for doing all the technical, dealing with all the technical matters on this. And a final point, the British Kazakh Society is a membership organization. It's a friendship society. It doesn't just run an education group. It has many other groups dealing with various aspects of industry and the professions. And we always welcome new members. And so if any of our participants today would like to consider joining the society, then please do get in touch with us, and we'd be delighted to give you details. And of course, you can always look at the website and go through that, where you'll also find further details about the education group and some of our forthcoming events. Thank you very much indeed from the United Kingdom. Look forward to seeing you again very shortly. Thank you.